The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the STFM Faculty for Tomorrow webinar series. Today's webinar is titled Essential Presentation Skills, Present Like a Pro with Dr. Jennifer Middleton. This is webinar number 5 out of an 8-part webinar series presented by the Faculty for Tomorrow Task Force. You can find recordings of all of the previous webinars in this series at stfm.org under Online Courses in the Webinars tab. The Faculty for Tomorrow Task Force is a 2-year initiative by STFM to address the shortage of family medicine faculty. It will provide resources and training for new faculty, including those moving from private practice to family medicine education, identify and support young family physicians with leadership potential, ensure that leaders of institutions understand the time and competencies required to be faculty, and expand STFM's formal faculty recruiting efforts of residents. Faculty for Tomorrow is supported by the American Board of Family Medicine Foundation and by the STFM Foundation. You may notice today as an attendee that there is a handout available that you can download on the dashboard of your webinar, so feel free to follow along there. And today it's my pleasure to introduce our expert presenter for today, Dr. Jennifer Middleton. Dr. Middleton, if you're ready, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Emily, and I'm thrilled to be here today with all of you. I hope we're going to have some fun. Please definitely take advantage of the GoToWebinar feature to ask questions if you have any questions during the webinar, and we'll have some pauses where I'll ask Emily to read off any of those that we've gotten throughout the entire hour together. I am Jen Middleton. I am the Associate Program Director at Riverside Methodist Hospital Family Medicine Residency that is in Columbus, Ohio, and I wear another hat, which is as Contributing Editor at American Family Physician. I have a deep affinity for all things faculty development, and one of my most favorite things to present on is presentation skills. So let's kick things off. And there's our reminder to use that dialog box to submit questions at any time. So we've gotten our introductions out of the way. There's kind of 3 key discussion points we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how do you organize presentation content with the Kemp model in a meaningful way, how do you create slides that keep your audience's attention, and how do you engage your audience with an accessible physical presence. And at the end, Emily will share some resources that STFM has available to help you learn more. So these are our objectives for our hour together. My goal is that you'll leave here ready to plan your next presentation using the Kemp model of instructional design, that you'll be able to create captivating slides, and that you'll be able to explain how body language influences audiences. So here's our first participant poll. How long was it before you pulled out your smartphone at the last presentation you attended? And it's all anonymous, so we won't know who you are, so feel free to be completely honest. And I'm going to hand it over to Emily to launch the poll.
Absolutely. I kind of jumped the gun there. I just launched it. You should be able to vote and let us know how long was it before you got your smartphone out. I know the temptation is strong, especially when you've got it right there in your pocket. Looks like you all are figuring out how to pull in, which is perfect. And there's a pretty good 3-way race going on, I can just tell you right now. So it looks like you've got a pretty diligent bunch, though. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and show us the results here.
Thank you, Emily.
And here we go. Oh wow, look at that. We have 31% for equal tie for the first 3 options.
And there are some people that you 8%. I applaud your honesty. Thank you very much. All right. So keep in mind the results of that participant poll going forward, and we're going to talk about 2 key time metrics I'd like you to keep in mind. The first one is 30 seconds. So 30 seconds is the amount of time you have before your audience forms their first impression of you when you stand up to give a presentation. as you can imagine, that's not a whole lot of time, and they're making a lot of decisions about you based on things that have nothing to do with your content and the words you're going to say whatsoever. So we're going to talk about that. The next number that is important for you to know is 10 minutes. 10 minutes, according to several studies, is the average length of time that you have that the audience will stay with you, just you giving them one-way information, you talking at them, didactic sort of stuff, before they're going to start to drift away without you doing something to actively get them engaged. There are some more recent studies that suggest for digital natives, such as the millennial generation, that period of time might be even shorter. And that is absolutely not a negative. Millennials and digital natives are used to interacting with their media very actively. So they are not going to be content just to sit back and passively take in information. So I'd like for you to keep that number in mind as well. And why is that so important? Because everybody has this sitting in their pocket. And it might be a beautiful thing to imagine that they're going to use this lovely smartphone in their pocket to work on email. But unfortunately, the reality is that they're more likely to quickly drift away to something like this if you don't actively keep their attention going. So these are tempting little devices that everybody has, and you've all seen it when you're in a presentation. And if you haven't, watch the next time if there's not active audience participation, how long it takes for those smartphones to start coming out of pockets and for other things to start going on. So it is your job to keep your audience's attention and to make a presentation that is interactive and engaging and captivating. And we're going to talk about the 3 key elements of doing that. The first is making sure your content is focused. The #1 mistake most presenters make is that they include way too much information and overwhelm folks. So we're going to talk about how to keep your content focused. We're also going to talk about how you make your slides supportive of your message and not detracting or, almost worse, boring. And last but certainly not least, how you have an accessible physical presence. It's really important to give your audience the opportunity to connect with you. And we'll talk about some things you can do to help you to do that so that you hopefully have glowing reviews at the end of your presentation. So let's get started at the first section and talk about content a little bit. And we're going to cover the Kemp model, and specifically within that we're going to focus on objectives and structure. So here we go with our next poll question. The last time I gave a presentation, the first thing I did was, so did you think about your goals? Did you just open PowerPoint? Did you read and research? Did you make an outline? Did you talk to your learners? So I'll let Emily open the poll.
My apologies, this poll kind of broke down on me here, but you can all submit, if you're interested, you can submit in the question box. You can just go ahead and let us know by just typing it in. What did you do? Did you start with your goals? Did you start with your PowerPoint? Did you read and research? I can tell you that for myself, I recently started with an outline. I had a presentation to give yesterday, and I definitely started with my outline first of all. I'm seeing people say that they talk to their learners about their goals. Somebody else says a bunch of people are saying that they started with their outline, but I'm also seeing lots of people saying that they started by talking to their learners, which is great. But also, yeah, strong showings. I'm saying we're seeing a pretty solid mix of, somebody says outline and goals. Very nice. Getting A and B in there. So it looks like we have, I love how many people are saying talk to your learners, because that is something I'm afraid I personally don't always start there with, what is it that they want to learn? So that's a great starting point. I'd say just eyeballing all these answers streaming in from the dialogue box, I'd say we had a pretty even representation.
That's great. And there's no right or wrong answer here, and we'll talk about a little bit why there's no right or wrong answer here. My argument would be is that these are all things that are important to do at some point in the planning process, but each of us often have an intuitive place we like to start at the planning process. So let's talk a little bit about one specific way or model that we could use to do that planning process to make sure we have our content focused to meet our learners' needs. And we're going to talk a little bit about a curricular design model next. So curricular design models, why are they useful? Why do you want to think about planning in a more formalized way? Well, they provide a structured planning process. They kind of help you make sure that you hit one of all of those things that we just talked about on the last poll question. Did you talk to your learners? Did you do the research that you need to do? It also helps you keep important details from being lost. There can be a lot that goes into planning a presentation, especially a longer or more complicated presentation like this one today. You know, an hour-long presentation can have a lot that goes into it. A curricular design model also can help keep your content aligned with your goals and your objectives. And the bonus there is if you have built precise, specific objectives, you will make sure by doing that that you do not make that cardinal sin of trying to cram too much into your presentation. And last but not least, curricular design models can help ensure that the content will drive how you teach it. You know, if you're going to teach people, for example, patient-doctor communication techniques, probably how you teach it needs to include some opportunity for them to practice using those techniques, for example, in a role play. So make sure that the strategies you're using are a good fit for your content. So let's take a look at the first pre-assessment question that we sent out for folks in the last week. And we're going to talk about the Kemp model of instructional design. And as you can see, most of our webinar participants don't have a lot of familiarity with Kemp. A few did. 3% found it very helpful. 9% had some familiarity, you know, to 17.5% that it sounded pretty familiar. But we're going to go through Kemp, so forgive us, please, at 3%. In a little bit of detail, since a lot of folks haven't heard of it, in hopes that you will find it a useful tool the next time you have to give a presentation. So let's take a look at the overall model first. So when you look at the Kemp model, before you even look at the words, notice that there are no arrows or lines. So you can start anywhere in this model. It is very flexible. If, for example, someone says, hey, junior faculty member, I need you to give a presentation on topic X. You'll be starting with content, you know, down there in the lower right-hand corner. But you might be starting from specific objectives instead, or from specific goals. So you can start anywhere on the model. For the purposes of talking through each of the elements of the model, we're going to start at the top and work our way around the circle. But again, this is meant to be a very flexible model, and you don't necessarily have to go in this order. It's just convenient for us. So let's talk first about instructional goals there at the top of the model. Instructional goals can and should be very loosely defined. They don't need to be measurable. They really can be these beautiful pie-in-the-sky ideals. Unlike objectives that you may have heard in the past need to be precise and measurable, instructional goals should be really lofty. And it's important to write down and have a clear sense of what these are, because the goals many times are kind of the passion or the fuel for getting the work done of putting the presentation together. And your audience can tell if you have passion and excitement for your topic. That's a big part of making the connection with your audience. So know what your goals are. Even if you don't share them explicitly with your audience, know for you why this presentation is so important. And don't be afraid to get a little corny and get lofty. The next step in the Kemp model are the learner characteristics. So we asked on the poll, and a significant number of folks on the poll said they would start first with understanding who their learners are. And it's easy to think about learner characteristics as being pretty straightforward. Who are my types of learners? Do I have students? Do I have residents? And what year are they? Do I have faculty? Do I have all of them together in a room? How do I meet all of their needs simultaneously? But you want to think too, what do I know about my learners' personality types or their learning styles? How comfortable are they with the material? Is this going to be brand new material for most folks in the room, or is it something that they already know a lot about? What's the learning environment like? Is the room set up in a way that's conducive for them to participate in whatever way it is you want them to participate in? What time of day is it? Is it 7 o'clock in the morning and everybody's kind of sleepy, or 5 o'clock in the evening when everybody's wiped out from the day? Or is it noon when they're all hungry, or maybe even eating during your presentation? So think deeply about who your learners are and what they are bringing into the presentation. And if you have thought about all those things, you can take these into account when you're planning your objectives, your content, and your strategies down the model. The next step in the model is task analysis. And that is basically just a fancy to-do list. What tasks will you need to do to complete this design? Do you need to do some reading and some research? Are there some things about the topic you're not familiar with, or things that you just want to make sure you're as up to date as possible? Do you need to do a literature review, for example? Do you need to ask for some help to get an expert available to assist you, or maybe for whatever reason it would be useful to have another person co-present with you? You know, is it worthwhile doing any kind of investigative work if you're doing a presentation, say, for example, on treating asthma, on what's available in your office for folks in terms of nebulizers and peak flow meters and spirometry? So any and all of those things that you need to do in the early stages to complete the design for your presentation go into task analysis. Let's move on next to the instructional objectives, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on objectives because they're super important. So I will tell you again, the most important rule is to focus your content on 3 to 4 main points. That is the most that the majority of learners, unless they have a photographic or eidetic memory, are going to walk away remembering. So you can say we're going to spend an hour and learn every single different type of EKG tracing that there is, but nobody's going to walk out remembering every single different type of EKG tracing. But if you focused it on 3 to 4 states, you're much more likely to have folks retain information. What are those 3 to 4 main points? You identify them at the very beginning of your presentation with your objectives. That way your learners know from the get-go what is the most important information, and it provides a focus for them to stay connected with you during the presentation. Good objectives should be measurable and precise. All right? You have seen in your career lots of folks who have not had the training that you have done now, that you are doing now, use objectives with verbs like understand and appreciate. That's perfectly fine for an instructional goal, but completely unacceptable for an objective. You need to be able to measure your objectives, because when we get back around to the top of the model, you're going to use your objectives to determine if you met your goals for the presentation. Well-written objectives identify the most important material for your learners. Again, that laser focus. And on the next slide, we're going to just look quickly at some verbs that are much more powerful than understand or appreciate that will help you write powerful objectives. So this is Bloom's taxonomy. And for those who have been around the block a couple of times, myself included, this is a newer version of Bloom's that you might have learned back in fellowship or residency. The bottom of the pyramid is most appropriate for new material. So if you're presenting folks with brand new material, you want them first to be able to remember it, to recognize, define, list what that material is. And the next step up on that ladder, the understanding level, again, appropriate for providing learners with new information. So in a session where you're doing new stuff, want them to be able to summarize, explain, classify, describe. A little bit more higher level of thinking than just recognizing or listing things. The next level up, applying, things start to get a little more complicated. You want folks to choose, discuss, demonstrate. The top 3 levels of the pyramid are best for topics that your learners already have some experience with because it requires more complex thinking. So analyzing, select, compare, debate, evaluating, critiquing, interpreting, appraising, and at the tippity top, creating, designing, organizing, inventing. Ideally, a well thought out curriculum over a period of time gives your learners a chance to first gain new knowledge at the bottom of the pyramid and then apply it in increasingly sophisticated ways working up toward the top. So this is a nice kind of cheat sheet of fabulous verbs on the right-hand side that should all help you to create very precise and measurable objectives. But focus, focus, focus. All right, let's move on to the next step of the Kent model, which is content. And as you can see, content is not at the top of the model. And even though you can start anywhere, a lot of times folks intuitively think to look toward the top of the model. And the folks who designed this model intentionally did not put content up at the top. Why? Why did they put content kind of further down at the bottom? Because they wanted those things that precede content to drive what the content is. So who your learners are, what they know about the material, what your objectives, what your goals are, all of that should help to drive your content. And I'll just let Emily hit forward, so let that bus drive the content. Next on the Kent model are the instructional strategies, and we're going to spend a smidge of time here as well. So content is one thing, but you don't just want to deliver content one way. We've already talked, you only have 10 minutes max before folks are going to start to tune out. So certainly you can just do plain old didactic on the left of the slide here. I would advise not doing that for any presentation that should last longer than 10 minutes. In the center of the slide is my favorite way to structure most of the teaching presentations I do. And just one more click there, please, Emily. And that is to do dyads of didactic, 10 minutes or less, followed immediately by an activity that reinforces the information in the didactic. And as you can imagine, each of those little dyads should pair magnificently with those strong, measurable, precise objectives you just wrote. So didactic and activity for the first objective, didactic activity for the second objective, didactic activity for the third objective. On the far right side, there are some teaching experiences that appropriately should be mostly activity. If you're going to teach people how to suture, for example, you probably don't want to stand up there and do a didactic about it. You want to give people some pig's feet and suture and let them get to work. So think about what activities and what structure fits your content best to maximize learning. Your activities should correspond to your content. So what kind of activities can you do? All right, you might have a discussion about something. We'll just keep clicking through them, Emily. You might brainstorm, have a brainstorming session. You might have them do some problem solving. They might work through some case studies. They might play some games. Games are really cool. You want to make sure you're not including games just to include them. Imagine I'm making little air quotes with my hands right now. Games can be wonderful instructional strategy, but they should always be thoughtful and related to the content at hand and not just thrown in there just to do it. So make sure that your game makes sense and fits with what your content is. You might do everybody's favorite role play. I say that with a little bit of sarcasm, of course, but a lot of things such as doctor-patient communication techniques, it's going to be hard for folks to practice and reinforce those skills without doing some role play. And last but not least, skill practice might be important depending on what your content, your objectives, and your goals are. So there's obviously lots of other ways that you can engage your audience, but these are all some specific ideas that you might think about in terms of activities for your next presentation. Next step on the model is designing the message. For a lot of folks, the idea of designing the message automatically, they think of PowerPoint. And I'm sure we had some folks in our last poll, the first thing they do is just open up PowerPoint. For a lot of folks, that's brainstorming. PowerPoint has a lot to recommend it, but there are a lot of other cool things out there, and you want to, again, make sure that you're designing your message in a way that fits your content. So if you're not familiar with Prezi, Prezi is a different alternative to PowerPoint that might be more suitable for your content. And I'll just make a little aside here. I'm not going to talk about each of these different alternatives in detail right now. That's a little outside of the scope of today's presentation. But if you hear something you haven't heard of before, you might make a note of it and go check it out online. So Prezi is a wonderful alternative. Haiku Deck is a beautiful, very visual interface that you can use instead of PowerPoint or Prezi. SlideDog gives you the opportunity to mix lots of different types of media into one presentation, so you can very easily combine video and slides. You can even go back and forth between PowerPoint and Prezi with SlideDog. Many of you are probably familiar with Poll Everywhere, so the idea of online polling. But there is other online polling software that's available. Kahoot is free, game-based online polling that has a little bit different look than Poll Everywhere. And of course, don't forget about going old school. There might be a totally appropriate way to use a flip chart or a whiteboard in your presentation. And there might also be an appropriate way to get out the chalk and use the chalkboard. So don't choose these things just to choose them and just because they're cool. Choose them because, again, they fit with your content, they fit with your objectives, and they fit with your goals. All right, we're coming to the end of the Kent model here. We're going to just talk very briefly about support services. Support services are kind of all of those little finishing touches to make sure that things go smoothly, making sure your slides are projecting well, you've got all the right cables that you need to get things going, that you have somebody to print off handouts for you if you're going to use handouts. And especially if you're doing 7 o'clock in the morning, you better bring the coffee and the donuts, all right? Hungry learners are not effective learners. So all those little details that you want to think about, and sometimes when you're looking at your support services, you're going to be flipping back to look at your task analysis and who your learners are to make sure you're covering everything for them. All right, last but not least, evaluation. And obviously we could spend a whole day talking about evaluation, but all I'm going to say today is that you want to make sure you find some way to evaluate that you met your goals and objectives with your presentation. Sometimes it's as simple as if your objectives involve your audience doing something actively, observing them doing it actively. Did they participate? Were they successful? Sometimes it might involve something more formal, like in a form that you have them fill out at the end of the presentation. You will all evaluate today's webinar at the end of today's webinar, and we will eagerly look forward to hearing what you have to say and to write. And then last but not least, it's important not to forget this outer ring of the Kent model, the revision in the upper left-hand corner. So a good curriculum is never really done. Hopefully you use the results of your evaluation to make things even better the next time around and work your way around the model again. So before we move on to talk about slide design, I'm going to pause here and ask Emily if we have any audience questions.
Absolutely. So we do have a few questions here. Let's see. So, it looks like a few people are asking about a few people are actually just curious about the handout, that you can definitely take a look at that handout. So it looks like we don't have too many going on right now, but definitely send them in. And thank you all for your participation. I appreciate you hanging in there with the various little tech difficulties we run into.
Absolutely. The handout, if you check it out, even at the end of the webinar, has a whole summary of the Kent model on it, and also summarizes all the information that we're going to go over for the rest of today. So hopefully that's a resource for you. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's go ahead, Emily.
I will jump in and I apologize. We did have a few people I just noticed had asked if this is going to be a recorded session. It absolutely is being recorded, and we'll send out an email link to the uploaded recording by the end of today. So just wanted to get that out there. Don't worry, we are going to be sharing this with you all.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, let's talk about slide design. We're going to talk about font, visual support, and animations here. So take a look at this next slide here, and there's two boxes of font, one on the left and one on the right. And can you tell the difference between the font on the left and the font on the right? And that's okay, Emily. Let's go to the next slide. So now we've got the letters a little bit bigger. And if you'll click again, please, you'll kind of notice these little tails hanging off the letters on the right-hand side that are not present on the left-hand side. So the font on the left-hand side is called sans serif font types, and there are many different types of sans serif font types. Sans serif font is less fatiguing for distance reading. So you will never see a billboard in anything but a sans serif font. Good PowerPoint presentations are always made in sans serif, and most of the fonts that you look at on your computer screen are also sans serif fonts. So this poor cat without a tail gives you a clue that sans is Latin for without. And you can probably guess what serif is Latin for. So serif fonts, on the other hand, are less fatiguing for close-up reading. So whether you're reading a old school paper book or doing a fancy new Nook or other e-reader, chances are the font you're looking at on your book or e-reader is in serif font, and it's easier on the eyes. Now I can't give you the specifics of why that is. I'm sure there are some very intelligent neuro-ophthalmologists who could explain it for us. But for whatever reason, those little tails that make it much easier and more comfortable to read font close up make it much more difficult and fatiguing to read font far away. So next time you go to a presentation and someone has done it in Times New Roman font, pay attention to your energy level. You will notice that it probably flags a little bit. And that's because subconsciously it takes more energy for your brain to process those words when you project them in a serif font. So please, 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 whatever you do for the rest of your career, do not make a PowerPoint ever again in serif font. Don't beat yourself up for having done it before. You didn't know. And that's the other thing. Remember to be kind to other folks who are giving presentations who didn't know this, who don't know this, but pass that knowledge along going forward to your peers and your colleagues. And you'll find that it really helps your audience have better energy and stay connected with you. So this point is so important that our next poll question is actually a test of your knowledge of sans serif and serif fonts. So I'll let Emily pull that up. So which of the following fonts is a sans serif font? And unfortunately, when we switch to the actual poll, you'll lose this different font faces. So I think Emily's going to instruct you to take a really close look right now and choose your answer.
Absolutely, yeah. We wanted to do this poll. We thought it was important, but we want you to go ahead and look at it kind of on our slide deck so you can already be thinking about, choose which one of these do you think has the sans serif, no tail. And I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll now that you've all had a good chance to look at it, and let's see what we've got. Everyone, you should be able to put your votes in and see if you had that memorized for which one it was that was the sans serif font. And like everyone is getting their votes in, and also it looks like did a good job of holding it in their mind because of the confidence with which you're sending in your votes. So let's
Awesome.
go ahead and see if we can share these results. And here we go. So those are our results.
So great work. The vast majority of you chose correctly that Calibri is the only sans serif font. All of the other fonts on that previous slide have little tails hanging off of them. Calibri is a wonderful font for PowerPoints. Arial is also often used, but Calibri I think is just a little bit friendlier. So that one tends to be my go-to. And yes, fonts can have personalities. So take a look and see what you think. Let's move on now to the second pre-assessment question. We asked you all, do your slides reflect your personality? When people see them, they know they're yours. And as you can see, we were kind of across the map in responses. Some folks, really disagreed with that statement. They didn't feel that was true. A lot of folks were in the middle, and then we do have some folks who felt that they had very strong slide design. So for you folks in the somewhat agree and strongly agree, that might be just a smidge of a review or reinforcing things that you are already done well. For everyone else, let's talk through a couple things. So let's talk first about slide karaoke. What is slide karaoke? Well, take a look at this next slide here. And you can probably imagine you've seen a lot of slides and presentations, I'm going to guess, in your career so far to date. And what usually happens when somebody has a slide that looks like this? Yes, they start reading it to you. Testing for corneal abrasion. Start by turning off the lights in the room. Make the room as dark as possible. And you're already bored, right? So, slide karaoke is not fun. And one of the reasons why is because your audience can read faster than you can talk. So they've already sped ahead of you where you are speaking out loud. And guess what? Once you lose your audience's focus, their attention, once they pull out that smartphone, they are not coming back, all right? Let's face it, we've all been there and pulled out that smartphone. Once you're gone, you're gone. So can you sing along? Nah, boring, 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 all right? So nix slide karaoke. One fairly easy way to make sure you avoid slide karaoke is to avoid another concept called, quote, death by bullets, which is point after slide of bullets. And bullets are those little dots off to the side of all the words on the left-hand side of the screen. Up until this slide, you have not seen any bullets in this presentation. And I encourage you to think about reducing or even, may I be so bold, to eliminate the bullets in your presentation. Why? Because that's what everybody does. That's kind of the default PowerPoint slide, is a title on the top and then the bulleted points underneath. And the problem with that setup is it doesn't give you any chance to inject your personality. Remember, we talked at the beginning, your audience wants to make a connection with you. So when you design without bullets, something magical happens. Your slides start to look like you. My residents tell me they can tell Middleton slides from a mile away. As soon as they even see a title slide up for a presentation, they don't have to see my name on the slide. They know it's a Middleton slide deck. Now, I acknowledge for a lot of folks this idea of designing without bullets, using a completely blank PowerPoint template for each slide can feel a little uncomfortable and intimidating. I promise if you push through that discomfort and give this a try, you will be very happy with the results. I've seen it happen over and over again over the years when I've mentored residents and junior faculty putting together PowerPoints. And these same design principles hold for Prezi, for Haiku Deck, for anything else that you're going to use. Try to inject your personality into things and don't just overload on bullets just because. If you're going to use bullets, use it with intention and for a deliberately good reason. So some of the things that you can use to help your slides to visually look great, don't just drop pictures in from Google Images. Make them fit the design that you want them to fit so you can crop them so that only part of what's included. The next slide has my most favorite trick ever, and there is a hyperlink in your handout with instructions on how to do this, but remove background. So if you've never used remove background in PowerPoint before, check it out. Look how cool that is on the right-hand side. It just looks integral to the slide now, that heart. And the beautiful thing is that those boundary lines around the heart on the left-hand side, subconsciously, again, your brain has to process those borders. Removing those borders puts the focus wholly on the image itself and conserves your audience's energy. So play around with remove background. That's a pretty cool one. A couple of distracting no-nos to avoid, all right? You've all seen this. Pictures with copyright watermarks. Tacky, tacky, tacky. Again, distracting. Instead of looking at this fine physician in training, you're staring at the watermark on his forehead, okay? Do not use pictures with copyright watermarks and distract your audience. Keep your audience's attention on your content. Along the same lines, you'll see a lot of folks say, I'm going to put in a cartoon to keep things interesting. And now you're all thinking about SpongeBob instead of about this presentation, okay? So don't just fling stuff in to fling it in there. If you're going to have a cartoon, make it relevant to what your topic is. Last but not least, animation no-nos to look out for. And I'll have Emily just click through these for me. Flying out, flying in, floating in. Some others that you can't even frankly use in this version of Google Drive that we're presenting this to you on today because they're so old school, but you'll still people use bounce, wheel, and swivel, distracting, 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 all right? However, you can use animation intelligently to your advantage, and that is using appear and disappear to help keep your audience's attention, especially when you have several connected ideas that would be overwhelming if presented all at once. Remember, your audience can read faster than you can talk. So if you have a lot of stuff going on your slide, hopefully not too much, but at least a few ideas, bring them in one at a time. Keep your audience's focus with you and not jumping ahead of you. I'm going to pause here before we wrap up talking about physical presence to ask Emily if we have any audience questions.
Absolutely. Let me check in on that for us and see what we've got coming in. Okay. I think we've just got some participation kind of questions. I can tell everyone's paying attention because we've got a few votes coming in still for some of our polls by the questions. So I think that we are good to go for the moment.
All right. Well, then we're going to finish up talking about physical presence. And we're just going to briefly touch on this here, make sure we have time for some questions at the end also. But we're going to talk a little about posture, gesturing, and dress. So our next and final pre-assessment question is on the next slide. And we asked you all how comfortable you are presenting in front of an audience. And a lot of you are actually quite comfortable. So 50% at least somewhat agreed, and 18% strongly agreed that you're very comfortable in front of an audience. So that is wonderful. For those folks who are uncomfortable, you are in very good company. A lot of folks get intimidated or nervous getting up in front of an audience. I have done community musical theater, and I still get a little nervous in the first few moments in front of an audience. So that's normal, but there are some things that you can do physically to kind of convey confidence and comfort to your audience that kind of seem to have the magical effect of also helping you to feel more confident and comfortable. So let's talk about what a couple of those things are, along with why this is so important. And for those 68% of you who are super comfortable, I hope you pick up at least one new tip here, but otherwise, thanks for hanging along with us. And if you have any advice to give at the end of this webinar that I didn't mention, those of you who are super comfortable, definitely chime in with the dialog box, and we'll make sure that we share that at the end. So why are we spending time today at all talking about physical presence? Well, this pie chart kind of gives you an idea in terms of when we communicate ideas, what portion of that communication happens with words versus our voice versus our body movements. And you can see on the left side, over half of the message we convey are our body movements. We could obviously, and I've done this before, given whole presentations just on working on your voice tone and on your body movements. We're just going to touch a few highlights today, but suffice it to say, it's extremely important. The words alone are not enough. And if you're one of the folks who felt a little more uncomfortable on that survey, it may be worth checking out some resources to get more comfortable. So let's take a look at a presenter who is not super comfortable in front of an audience. So all of you probably had a pretty visceral reaction when this young lady came up on the screen. She does not look like she's having a good time. Let's break down why. What is it about her physical presence that is not conveying confidence and comfort with the audience? And notice, she can't say a word to us. So this is all physical body presence. She's not making great eye contact, first of all, so she's not looking straight ahead. She's kind of looking down through her glasses. She's got her head tilted to the side, and the reason that she's doing that actually is to guard her neck a little bit. So all mammals instinctively, when they're feeling threatened, will kind of guard their neck, and they do that by tilting their head and also by shrugging their shoulders a little bit. She is not smiling, and not only is she not smiling, she might almost be frowning, so that's not conveying a lot of confidence or comfort. Definitely, there's those hunched shoulders. She's got this giant binder in front of her, so she's partially blocked by this object. Even worse than hiding behind a binder is being behind a podium, which basically gives your audience just a view of, the top third to quarter of you and cuts you off. So it's very hard to connect with your audience when you're behind something. She's slouching. She's not standing up straight. Let's take a look at somebody who might be a little bit more comfortable as a presenter on the next slide. You all probably recognize this gentleman, the late Steve Jobs. And boy, if you'd like some examples about how to be a powerhouse in front of an audience, even if you're not an Apple kind of person, check out some of his videos of launches, product launches on YouTube. And you can learn quite a bit by the way he commands a room. But what's he doing differently than the lady on the last slide? Well, he is standing up straight. He is making committed eye contact. There is no fear. He's got his arms open. He's not closing his body off. He's got his body open. Even though he doesn't have a big grin on his face, he's kind of smiling with his eyes. He's got energy, light, and intensity in his eyes. So compare and contrast. You don't have to be as boisterous as Steve was, but you at least want to emulate this kind of open body language that he is conveying here. That will help your audience connect with you better. Your body language communicates powerful messages to your audience, all right? Very, very powerful. Those last two slides, there wasn't a word either of those two pictures sent to you, but they sent you a message. So you want to be deliberate and intentional and be in charge of what that message is. So what are some specific things you can do if you're not as comfortable? Well, to make eye contact with your audience, you don't just want to bore into their eyes. That makes folks a little uncomfortable. But you can potentially aim your gaze toward the last row of your audience, or you can bounce your gaze along across foreheads of folks. So you're not looking folks directly in the eye, making them uncomfortable, but glancing at foreheads helps them to feel connected that you're looking in their direction. You want to pay attention to your posture also. Your chest and your shoulders should be open and wide. A lot of us spend a lot of time hunching over computers and keyboards, so keeping those shoulders open. And you want to stand tall and straight. All of those physical characteristics convey that comfort and confidence to your audience. Along the same lines, you want to make sure your gestures are deliberate. Those of you who talk with your hands, you know who you are. We love you for it, but just be careful. It can be distracting. So our buzzwords of the hour, intentional and deliberate. Make sure when you're waving your hand in your air, like this gentleman on the left is, when you're pointing, like the lady in the middle is, or when you're kind of aiming toward your audience, as this gentleman on the right is, that you're doing it to reinforce a specific point, that you have a reason for doing it. Some folks may say, I'm the opposite. I don't even know what to do with my hands. If I can't stand behind a podium, what do I do with my hands? Well, you can hold a presentation remote in one hand. Presentation remotes free you from having to walk over and click the buttons on your computer to advance your slides. You can stand with one hand on a hip. Two hands gets a little Wonder Woman-ish. But one hand on the hip looks very comfortable and confident without going over the top. And if you have a podium nearby, putting one hand and standing to the side of the podium can kind of give you a little sense of anchoring, but still keeps you open to the audience. So there's a few ideas of what to do with your hands. So in the interest of time, I'm going to ask us to bypass the next poll question, if that's okay, Emily, and just move to the slide after that. And we're going to just spend our last minute or two together talking about clothes. And what do your clothes say about you? What is the message? Each of these ladies is dressed in a different level of formality. Any of them might be appropriate for your presentation. Again, you just want to make an intentional thought about what you're wearing. Who are your learners? I'm probably not going to present to the residents I see every day at New Conference in a three-piece suit. But I might think about doing that if I was going to a national conference, okay? So our final poll question, I'm going to ask Emily just to flash up on the screen, not for you to take the time to hit a button, but just to read through and think about and self-assess. The last time you gave a presentation, how much planning did you do regarding your clothing? Did you just wear what you were wearing that day? Did you at least make sure one of your favorite things was clean? Or did you really think carefully about those details? Well, let me give you an example of some things to be careful not to wear. All right, and what do all of these articles have in common? They are busy and patterned. Again, they're distracting, okay? You want your audience's attention on your content and your message, not on your crazy patterned shirt or tie. Even if it's not crazy and it's super attractive, still you don't want folks paying attention to that. Solid muted colors here on this slide are in general a safe bet for everybody with simple accessories. That keeps the focus on your message. So that is the end of the content that I have. Our final slide of my portion of this just gives you the opportunity to go to that handout, and I really urge you to do that. The last page of the handout has an action plan where you can take a minute or two and reflect on the things that you do well as a presenter, things that you might like to do better or differently the next time you give a presentation. There's something very powerful about writing down those intentions and plans if you want to make them a reality the next time that you give a presentation. So I really encourage you to do that. It has been such a privilege to be here with all of you today. I know we're going to open it up in a second, but I just want to say thank you to Emily, to Sarah, to everybody at STFM for the invitation to be here today. It's really been my pleasure, and I wish you all very happy presenting.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Middleton. This has been a lot of fun and an adventure in terms of switching up our presentation plan. We will be sending out a post-webinar survey in our email. You will all get an email, and I know that some of the questions that came in were some of those of you who joined us late. And we have recorded this entire presentation, which is lots of fantastic content by Dr. Middleton, and we will make this available on our STFM website. If you look under online courses and webinars, you'll be able to find the Faculty for Tomorrow webinar series there. But you will also get, everyone who registered for this webinar will get a recording of the session sent to them. We are a bit short on time here. We have time for perhaps just one very short question for those of you who can hang in with us. We had one person ask any tips for someone who has trouble with a bit of a soft voice in presentation. Do you have any suggestions for that? How to raise your voice and get everyone's attention?
Absolutely. The most important point actually is just practicing, believe it or not. It's not a very glamorous tip, but practicing and having someone that you're practicing your presentation in front of whose sole job of observing you practice is to give you feedback on your voice can be very useful. Folks who speak softly normally often will feel that they need to overcompensate by trying to shout or straining their voice, and that is one good way to fry your vocal cords very quickly. So if just practicing and thinking about raising the volume of your voice a bit is not natural or comfortable for you, look to see if there is a vocal coach available in your area. Some universities, in fact many universities, have that available as an option to them. And if you're out in a community or in a health system, I bet there's still a university nearby with a resource department that can assist. And how do you do that in a way that is comfortable for you? There's no need to shout or be especially loud, but you do want to make sure that folks can hear you well. And never be afraid to use a microphone to help you also if you are naturally soft-spoken and you're going to be in a relatively large room, because it is important that folks are able to hear everything that you say.
That's a great answer. We had lots of kind of fun questions sliding in right here at the end. I'd encourage any of you, if you're really have an urgent question, and you can send it my way, and we'll see if we can get it answered for you as well. But I just really appreciate, this is a fun webinar to do with you, Dr. Middleton. We have a ton of requests, even more requests for the slides are going to be available. So yes, check out our recording, share it with as many people as you like and as you want to, and take advantage of our YouTube recording that will be up in the next 24 hours. And do fill out the post-webinar survey. I'll just kind of flip through these last few slides. We will be sending out a post-webinar survey just to find out how we can serve you better with future webinars for the Faculty for Tomorrow series. So once again, thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.